Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the first of the month. Well, it's May, and this is the Anita Says Monthly Podcast, a place in which I invite you as a community to gather and listen to my thoughts about Indian, South Asian dance and what I've seen, felt for the entire month of April. So here goes. I begin with a quote from Martha Graham, the icon of American modern dance. She says, "Dancing is like dreaming with your feet. Great dancers are not great because of their technique. They are great because of their passion." Isn't it a beautiful quote? So welcome everybody to the merry month of May. It's a gorgeous time of year. Well, of course, I'm partial to this month because it's also my birthday month. Nature expresses herself in fascinating and unusual ways, and the world is on the move. Flights are jam-packed. Airports are teeming with people. Roads are jammed. It looks like our planet is buzzing. The oceans are filled with resort and holiday crowds on cruise liners. And, of course, the dance world is also buzzing and humming and singing along, even if the world around seems to be burning. However, what else are dancers supposed to do as the opinion pendulum swings from right to left, never pausing at the center? My travels and thoughts will focus on the here and now of what the month of April unpeeled for me. April concluded with International Dance Day, started in 1982 by the International Dance Committee of the UNESCO International Theatre Institute to promote global awareness of the art of dance. It has since become a marker for all dancers to celebrate in their cities and towns across India and the world. Performances, more performances, talks, discussions, conclaves, seminars, photo shoots, painting exhibitions, every form of word, movement, visual, and thought fill the many spaces in the days leading towards April 29th. My presence, for a few years now, has been in New Delhi to attend and savor the exquisitely curated weekend by my friend and colleague Geeta Chandran and her Natya Vriksha dance organization. Held at the India International Centre, the 18th edition of World Dance Day was launched by a movement workshop led by Tanushree Shankar. The searing 40 degrees Celsius heat was no deterrent for the large number of young dancers who registered for her session. Tanushree, daughter-in-law of the legendary Uday Shankar, the father of modern Indian dance, shared precious nuggets of the making of Shankar's magnificent movement pedagogy. A painter and a magician, Uday Shankar was led to create his unique choreographic style through two Westerners, his painting teacher, William Rothenstein, and dance mentor and colleague, prima ballerina Anna Pavlova. The style, named after him, used the kinetic markers of Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, and Manipuri to create a signature of flow and complete body involvement. Tanushree was a graceful and authentic leader who guided the eager dancers of various classical styles through 2 mornings of strenuous and imaginative choreography. It was fascinating to watch the students attempt to unlearn and absorb movement systems that were obviously new to them. I also joined in for a bit on both mornings and felt my body loosening up, thanking me and urging me to do more. A thoughtful lecture by poet Ashok Vajpayee titled Dancing Away reminded the audience that while dancers perform in the here and now, they are actually taking the audience on a journey to another place and time. That dance was perhaps the only art practice that could hold temporality and vulnerability within the crucible of transformation. The lucid statements about bhakti and shringara were telling. When there is too much emphasis on spirituality, dance becomes religious. When there is too much sensuousness, it becomes obscene. Interesting, right? Dancer turned storyteller Rama Bharadwaj shared her hit show, Avatarana, the story of dance, with her usual superb timing and humor. Now, this is a show that every dancer and non-dancer must watch. It embeds knowledge and concepts in an easy-to-follow style. The audience was laughing and relishing every minute of the hour-long exposition. The robust cheering at the end was well-deserved. Rama has a box office hit on her hands, and I see Avatarana with a long touring life ahead for her. The 2 evenings of performances showcased emerging dancers who have made a conscious commitment to their art as a full-time practice. On day 1, Bharatanatyam artist Madhura Brushundi sparkled in her opening showcase. A rising talent, nurtured by Guru Geeta Chandran, Madhura rose to the occasion with a lively Pushpanjali and an evocative interpretation of Adi Shankaracharya's Sharada Bhujangam. Now, it's not easy to be a student of a star guru whose shadow looms large, but Madhura has worked tirelessly to create her own voice in the 3 dance pieces she shared to a packed hall. The next performer on day 1 was Dhirendra Tiwari, a fabulous talent and most seen on Indian stages as part of the Aditi Mangaldas dance ensemble. During several sequences and crisp padhants, which is the rhythmic spoken syllables in Kathak, Dhirendra brought a cascade of applause. His one-leg twirls, split-second level changes, superb timing, and effervescent energy gave Delhi audiences a fresh perspective on Kathak. Here is a dancer with an X-factor worth following. Day 2 began with an excellent Kuchipudi performance by Abhinaya Nagajyoti. A student and disciple of her mother, Sita Nagajyoti, this lesser-known but promising dancer is brimming with talent. Abhinaya has the saucy lilt and gait of the style which she performed with aplomb. I watched several classical dancers and rasikas relish the scenes where she portrayed the famous heroine Satyabhama. The dance component of World Dance Day concluded with the excellent performance of Shashwati Garai Ghosh. A rising star in the Odissi world, this student of Sharmila Bishwas has been in the exploratory mode ever since the COVID lockdown. I have watched her many collaborations with dancers of other styles, and her firm Odissi grounding has given her a springboard to launch into partnerships with colleagues with mutual respect and self-confidence. Her performance was marked by clarity of technique and a marked maturity on stage. It is a gift that mid-level professional artists receive during the careful curation like Natya Vriksha's 2-day Young Dancers Festival. To have senior dancers and rasikas present for their performances, to receive a just remuneration, PR, publicity, a lighting director, all as wind beneath their sails, and responses for their appearance in the nation's capital. These are not what my generation experienced. We slogged and persisted the old-fashioned way and have lived to see today. I truly hope that these talented dancers realize what they have received in a world that is cluttered with too much information and too little discernment. Our best wishes to all 4 artists. You're listening to Anita Says, a monthly podcast about Indian dance and the shifts and events happening around the world as I see it, and I am Anita Ratnam. 6 degrees of surprise. A week before I was in New Delhi, I attended an ensemble performance of a little-known dance academy inspired by a student of Rukmini Devi's Kalakshetra. Founder and director S. Premnath has created the Rukmini Devi Natya Kshetra, a 25-year-old institution that has produced high-quality dance artists. Located in North Madras, away from the Mylapore nerve center of Bharatanatyam and its politics, seems to have helped the school flower quietly without interference. The production I watched was staged at the Rukmini Arangam inside the Kalakshetra campus. It was about the valor and wondrous achievements of the popular Tamil deity Murugan. Aaru Padai Veedu, the 6 sacred places of Murugan, also known as Skanda, was performed at a standard that took me completely by surprise. The hallmarks of the Kalakshetra style, the swift and light-footed running, the clear technique and special touches to certain props and entries, very much like Rukmini Devi used in her dance dramas, were all showcased. For me, the 3-hour-long production on a very humid evening was a revelation. Almost every student was a first-generation dancer from very modest homes. The dance presentation showed what a dedicated team of teachers, advisors, and patrons led by a determined Premnath at the helm can achieve. For me, it was an aha moment, and I left smiling. The Female Legacy Project. A wonderful interdisciplinary visual and performance showcase was presented by SNS Arts Consultancy, Shreya Nagaraj Singh, Goethe Institute, and Alliance Francaise in Chennai. The Female Legacy Project highlighted 3 artists from various disciplines: Usha Rani, a Terracotta performer; S. Sita Lakshmi, the only female shadow puppeteer who makes her own leather puppets; and Nartaki Nataraj, the award-winning Bharatanatyam dancer. Through photographs, short films, and quirky illustrations, the multimedia presentation brought the lives and challenges of these 3 extraordinary women to the forefront. In their interviews, each artist revealed the intense prejudice and patriarchy they endured to achieve success, economic and artistic. You're listening to Anita Says, a monthly podcast about Indian dance, and I'm Anita Ratnam. We now move to a dance theatre presentation called Her, the Resilient Flower. The live arts are so subjective that 3 people sitting next to each other in an auditorium can experience very different emotions and reactions watching the very same performance. 40 theatre and dance enthusiasts gathered in an intimate black box theatre to watch Italian Bharatanatyam dancer Lucrezia Maniscotti, who is also my Guru Behan, being a student of Guru Adiyar K. Lakshman. The dance theatre presentation was inspired by a text by German playwright Bertolt Brecht, titled The Good Person of Sichuan. Using dance, spoken text, props, and multilingual audio, Lucrezia interpreted the story of a single woman who attempts to rise above social prejudice to dream of a better life for her unborn child. Lucrezia had incorporated the presence of 2 musicians, K. Sarvesh and Deepa, who played the role of gods who come down to earth in search of the last good human being. Tamil, Carnatic music, English, Bharatanatyam, theatre were all employed rather effectively. Perhaps Lucrezia can incorporate her native Italian as well in the spoken dialogues to bring a personal stamp to this very popular story. One of the moments that really stood out for me was a lullaby she sings to her unborn child. And here she used a white cloth, and that cloth somehow magically transformed into a baby that was so believable, and her bond with that piece of cloth, that was a really beautiful moment that stayed with me. Gigenis in India. As I rewind my memories of April, I now come to my trip to Mumbai and a matinee viewing of the much-awaited presentation of Akram Khan's Gigenis, The Generation of the Earth. The overarching thoughts that swirled in my mind and in the minds of many friends who I met in the foyer was, why is Akram Khan back on stage after loudly proclaiming that Xenos was going to be his final stage appearance? The Grand Theatre at the NMACC, with 2,000 seats, was nearly filled with high-priced tickets. Dancers, actors, and rasikas from across India had travelled to watch the only India showing of Gigenis. The curtain rose to a dimly lit stage of Kapila Venu as the matriarch, about to witness the total destruction of family and clan. Her small frame seemed to expand to fill the stage, and from the opening moment, she towered above everyone else. The vague narrative of Queen Gandhari, torn between maternal love and royal duty in the Mahabharata, began to emerge, at least for me. Staying within her métier of Kudiyattam, with a rhythmic mirror played by Kalamandalam Rajiv, Kapila Venu's brilliance held the evening together. The other 2 stars of Gigenis were the sound design, led by B.C. Manjunath's superbly adventurous Konakol, and the lighting by Zeynep Kepekli. Yes, I got that right. Now for the performance itself. The power struggle between brothers, the literal crowning, snatching away, resulting loss of kingship, felt like musical chairs performed in a very literal manner. The choreography of a ravaged world from childbirth to maturity was divided between 4 dancers: a young girl, a new wife, a mother, and a mature woman. The sections were danced through the bodies of 3 performers: Odissi, a very unimpressive Sri Kalyani Adkoli, Vijna Vasudevan, a beautiful duet with partner Ranjit Babu, young mother Maithili Prakash, a competent performance but familiar, almost repetitive choreography of fluttering hands and flailing body that is at war with herself and the world. Kapila Venu was the fourth stage of a woman's journey from innocent joy to cynical devastation. Akram Khan and Mavin Koo looked visibly slower than their younger colleagues who bore the lion's share of the movement sections on their bodies. The choric arrangements, with the Carnatic music sections led by Soini Alam, Sushma Soma and Rohit Jayaraman, were melodious and often enhanced the abstract choreography. What jarred was the sudden insertion of the ghazal Ab Jaane Ki Zidd Na Karo. The inclusion of the Kriti Jambupate by Dikshatar was also questionable. Why was a reference to Lord Shiva, who's a master of five senses, used for an effervescent romantic interlude? In fact, all lyrical choices seemed superfluous to me. I was impressed but not overwhelmed with Gigenis. Akram Khan's choreographic skill in the creation of a common movement vocabulary that could be executed by Kathak, Odissi and Bharatanatyam trained dancers was fascinating to watch. The production values? Superb. While the artists were all classically trained, there was no visible trace of each style except for the brief posture of the Odissi Tribhanga. The 65-minute performance dragged towards the end, straining to conclude. It meandered and returned to a relentless focus of a word heading towards Armageddon. This was not choreographed activism, but rather a toe stab at the dismal state of the earth and the generation that will inherit the looming disaster. As a scholar friend said, for artists, the process of art making is the only resistance. So perhaps this is how an arts tycoon like Akram Khan expresses his worldview. The calamitous dirge continues with Akram's next presentation, Tikra, a night of remembering, again with the use of several classical dancers from India, US and the UK. The quiet hush at the end of Gigenis, with the mandatory standing ovation, was muted in some sections and heartily expressed with a bravo being shouted in the mezzanine sections. The lack of program notes was significant, leaving the audience, the Indian audience at least, with no context or credits to peruse before or after the event. Gigenis is clearly a work conceived and created outside India, where the current funding and business climate for art making encourages such a dark view of humanity. No paradox, no enchantment or sense of wonder. The themes of depression, isolation, are no more niche subjects for artistic exploration. Hollywood recognizes this as a universal and mainstream subject now. Gigenis was slick, well-crafted, superbly mounted, and professionally performed. It was certainly an afternoon well spent for many who have followed Akram's work from his early years since 1999. From No Male Egos with Mavin Koo, through Loose in Flight, 0 Degrees, Vertical Road, Gnosis, Giselle, Desh, Ma, In, I, Torobaka and Xenos, I have been following Khan's astonishing oeuvre over the last 26 years. This time I rose to my feet with a sense of weariness and ennui. Perhaps it is the bludgeoning of social media that has overexposed every aspect of Gigenis and ripped all the mystery and anticipation for me. Sometimes it helps not to read reviews or watch too many reels before actually watching the performance, I feel. Once an icon. Mystery and aura are important for every artist. One does not have to spill every second of one's life onto the digital sphere. There must be some aspects held back. Two icons who are still wrapped with a sense of mystery are Alarmel Valli and Malavika Sarukkai. Both are notoriously shy of social media and prefer to have their dance speak. Their appearances and opinions are still valued and eagerly listened to. Valli's rare Delhi appearance and subsequent talk for friend and colleague Madhavi Mudgal's institution revealed her gravitas and command over her language and artistic journey. Across the oceans, Malavika Sarukkai dazzled the Kennedy Center audiences with her new solo show, Bija the Seed. Young performers who had made the journey from other metro cities were captivated by the rigorous and intense dancing, her passion for Bharatanatyam, and a meticulously presented evening. Malavika is noticeably social media shy and takes long breaks for self-reflection and research. She is among the very few classical dancers in their 60s, like Valli, who have been on the international radar for 45 years and still remain firmly planted within the rubric of tradition. However, here there's a larger question I want to raise. Can a creative artist continue to have a trajectory of brilliant originality? Is there not a rise, a cresting, and then a downward slope, or at least a plateau? When does a much applauded and awarded performer start repeating themselves? When does it become apparent when a formula gets rehashed, cut and pasted to propel a flourishing brand forward? Does an artist require creative rest, a period of quiet, when the PR machine and the business side of dance making allow a chunk of reflection? Also, what happens when, in the case of the current Akram Khan-Mavin coup partnership, when India-trained dancers could suffer serious injuries when exposed to the Western method of rigor that mandates hours and hours of pounding and hammering the body to repeated company classes, rehearsals, and choreography? I know of numerous dancers suffering lower back and ligament tears that forces them to rest for 6 months after an international tour with Western dance companies. For generations of Indian dancers born and trained in India, each class here rarely takes more than 2 hours at a time. There is much more than technique and physical prowess that is required in the making of a dancer. Music, literature, poetry, reading, discussion, these are all part of the grooming and learning process. But not anymore, it seems. All that is needed today for a Western lens in Western climates and geographies is a body that submits to the punishing routine in the name of rigor and discipline. And finally, does the brand value of India-based dancers who work in international dance companies actually increase after the project ends? What do they return home to? Regular classes, online teaching, workshop touring? Does their own work shift and change with this experience? Do they absorb any qualities of collaboration and creation to insert into their own process? Does their home country recognize these prestigious assignments with rewards like greater visibility in festivals and a higher chance for honors? Or do they just wait until the next invitation to become a guest artist in another international project? You're listening to Anita Says, a monthly podcast about Indian dance, and I'm Anita Ratnam. Crossing over the rainbow. I have written about the many performances and other dance-related events I watched in April. I enjoyed watching such a wide variety of dances, and I felt blessed to have the opportunity of being this ever-curious Rasika. However, April also came with its share of grief and shocks. We lost 2 very important women among many others. The passing of Kathak icon Guru Kumudini Lakhya was a profound moment for dancers around the world. For decades, Kumi Ben had redefined what Kathak meant to her as a dancer and a choreographer. Impatient with what she considered unnecessary frills and fuss around Kathak, she began to work like a sculptor, discarding everything she felt was superfluous. In the process, Kumudini Lakhya discovered a whole new language within the classical idiom that spoke to her intimately and became a blueprint for the modern lens of Kathak. Draped in her favorite emerald green sari, Kumi Ben was given a grand send-off to the beyond from her home in Ahmedabad. There was an outpouring of grief, comments, and recollections by so many across the dance world and beyond about her wit, her sense of aesthetics, ensemble dance design, and the fresh makeover that she gave Kathak beyond Krishna and Radha. I will personally miss the annual phone call on my birthday. Kumi Ben and I shared birthdays within a few days of each other in this month of May, and we would call and wish each other on those special days. There was always talk about food, music, saris, accompanied by lots and lots of laughter. Another huge loss was the passing of scholar and dance producer Kamalini Dutt. A major force in Doordarshan, she was responsible for restoring numerous old and decaying databases of dance films. Her influence in dance archiving has been invaluable. Kamalini Dutt was steadfast in her efforts to preserve and protect the vast dance heritage of India. Artists who were recorded at the Doordarshan New Delhi studios speak of her meticulous care and sense of visual aesthetics that she brought to the recordings. Several other senior and noted artists also breathed their last in April. We are grateful for their service to dance and we say Atma Shanti to their departed souls. While Kamalini is survived by her dancer daughter Purva Dhanashri, what happens to the legacy of legends like Kumudini Lakhia? Who inherits her mantle? Who will continue to run Kadam, her academy in Ahmedabad? What about the rights of her major choreographies? Who will preserve and have the copyright over them? What are the questions that Tanushree Shankar has about her own legacy inherited from her mother-in-law Amala Shankar and father-in-law Uday Shankar? Her beautiful daughter Srinanda is a lovely dancer but a more successful design and lifestyle influencer who's not actively in the dance field. Why is it that so many young dancers today have no idea about who Uday Shankar is and have not heard of, let alone seen the seminal film Kalpana? There is a practice in Western countries of endowing dance choreographies after the artistic director passes away to the company board or to an individual. India has not confronted these aspects of intellectual property issues yet. And we have hundreds and thousands of dancers creating, learning, performing, and recording themselves every day. Social media handles have also become important archiving sources. So there's much to think about beyond the stage and the lights. News of the Natya Shastra and the Bhagavad Gita being recognized and included in the UNESCO's Memory of the World Register came at an opportune moment for Indic scholars and those engaged in the preservation of traditional practices. A timely international recognition for a culture that is embedded in stone and scripts, in oral transmission of knowledge, and the performing visual arts. Even the cringe-worthy visuals of Bharatanatyam dancers performing on the tarmac in an airport in the blistering heat as US Vice President J.D. Vance and his family arriving in India, even that cannot spoil our mood. The devaluation of our classical form by officials is disappointing, but we have to look beyond these obvious faux pas. As I head towards the USA this month and spend time in several cities on various professional and personal commitments, I take the time to wish you all a fabulous month of May. Peel off those coats and sweaters if you can. Go barefoot in the park. Feel the grass beneath your feet. Let the breeze caress your spirit. Smile. The world is waiting. Of course, I'm not forgetting those in the southern hemisphere for whom it is now winter. Stay well, everybody. But now I come to this podcast. I'm so grateful to all of you who have welcomed this monthly edition of Anita Says on Spotify and other audio channels, but I'm taking a break. I'm taking a break because I think the podcast needs a greater attention to each topic in greater detail. So when I come back after a brief break in which I will think about what I want to share with all of you, because right now I'm basically reading for you and speaking the audio version of what I write on the Nartaki editorial that comes out in the digital version as a Nartaki newsletter, Anita Says, on the first of every month. Well, that's been happening for about 15 years. But I think a podcast needs to be more intimate, more chatty, and I think we can take the time to dive deep into one or two specific topics, and I think all of you might enjoy that. So I'm going to say goodbye for this edition, and I'm going to say goodbye for a short while because I need to rest, recuperate, think, reset, and come up with fresh new ideas. So thank you all once again for being such a warm audience and listening audience, being part of a growing community, which is what this podcast is all about. And send us those comments because it's really important for me to hear from you. Stay well, everybody. And this is Anita Ratnam saying thank you for listening. Bye.